Oh, did everybody else hear that? I assume you did.
We did. Maybe just for the record, before we went live, the Master Plan Advisory Committee approved the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay. I'm actually trying to find my copy of the agenda, but I can't find it. So next on the agenda, I assume, is reviewing the public comments.
So I'm going to go ahead and, Andrea, if that's okay with you, turn it over to Mark to just kind of walk through how he put all that together, working with John's group, and maybe start walking us through the process. So
Yeah,
Mark,
Mark, go ahead. It was very comprehensive, so appreciate that.
Mark, I'm going to open that Excel sheet for you.
Yes, I'm sorry to have sent you so many different things in various documents. We have Excel, we have Word documents. You will see some embedded PDF documents and later things that we will ultimately pull up through the process. Tricia and I kind of organized this. We'll start with review comments that were actually submitted through our EDARP system, and then we'll go through some other review comments that we've received separately. In fact, I received review comments as late as yesterday afternoon and this morning. And there may be a couple comments that we anticipate may still come, like from Fort Carson, who hasn't commented yet. After those EDARP review comments and then those additional comments that were sent to me, then we'll start to get into some public comments that have occurred, both in email format and responding to the notice that we put out to have comments. We'll show ultimately, if we need to, Tricia will show some graphics that assemble those comments, and we'll go into a little bit greater detail on how many comments we received and why we received so many of those comments. You may remember that we put out the version of the document except the implementation chapter and except the graphics that will occur, the place type graphics. We put that out on March 8th or March 9th, and we gave people, it's dated March 8th, but March 9th was the start. We asked review agencies, we gave them a time period till April 9th, and we asked the public to have comments by April 9th. On the 26th of March, we then resent out or re-put out the document with the implementation chapter and the additional place type graphics. And we resent to review agencies, notice that they could do additional comments, that there was additional information, they could do additional comments. So in some of the things you'll see, there may be 2 comments from a review agency. That's because they had 2 opportunities to do that review. Those comments technically closed on the 9th. The sheet for public comments was locked down that evening on the 9th, and so I've received some additional comments separately from those. So what we're going to do is Tricia's going to keep track of all the documents. She's controlling that. These are the same documents the advisory committee seen. I'm sorry they came late, but that's what the schedule ended up dictating. If we close stuff down on the 9th, you got it on Tuesday morning, shortly after the next Tuesday after that. Staff has gone through here and we've highlighted certain sections that from a staff level, we believe result in changes to the document. The intent here is to try to provide a single list of those changes to the document that need to go forward. Our desire is to try to take these changes that we see now, revise the document on the Friday the 23rd, and have it ultimately release that after the 23rd for the Planning Commission hearings, which are on May 5th. It's a very aggressive schedule to try to accomplish this. Tricia's going to lose sleep. Mark's going to lose sleep. But we've tried to highlight with layers and notes off to the right with action of what staff recommends. And so maybe the most efficient is someone speak or raise their hand if they have a comment further on what we see here. Otherwise, we're going to try to scroll through some of those. I'm happy to explain those comments, but some of them are self-explanatory. So people can see the screen. Is there anything that has any comments on this? Okay, I guess there's none. How would be most efficient? Do you want me to continue to speak and say there's no comments on this page? Okay. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see from Schriever Air Force Base. They sent us separate comments. They entered here and they gave us Word documents, and they provided some additional images they would request to include in the document on the military chapter. One of the things they mentioned was that we had the radio domes too close to where the housing was. And so we'll ask the consultant to potentially move those to a slightly different location.
Hey, Mark, before we get into that one, should we talk about line 14, Meadow Lake?
Well, happy to talk about it. We honored what the sketch plan showed for land north of Meadow Lake Airport. And that sketch plan, through the review process of the Planning Commission, changed it from residential to industrial. Industrial, through the master plan process here, is considered an employment center. So we honored the action the Planning Commission took of converting the flight path north of the airport to employment center.
Essentially non-residential was the key factor.
Yeah, and now we're getting some objection to including that category. We're kind of at a loss. We can't please some people on the plane, and that's why we recommended no change going forward. Be happy.
It's probably worth noting that that sketch plan was changed to show industrial as a response to Meadow Lake Airport's comments on that application. And they were generally very happy that it got changed from residential to non-residential. And so the best way to map this in the master plan is as an employment center, because that is a non-residential area. So really, we tried to totally implement what not only has been approved by the Planning Commission and Board, but also implement what we'd heard from Meadow Lake all along. And now they're saying that it should be open space and taking a development right away from that property owner. And I'm just not prepared to do that given the approvals that are already in place. So that's a good example of, it's kind of like a moving target for us. We feel like we're doing the right thing here by Meadow Lake. And creating predictability in that area, and it feels like the target's ever moving. So just because we don't recommend a change doesn't mean necessarily it's a bad thing. I think in this case, we've done everything we can to try to accommodate Meadow Lake in that area.
And I think it's important to note, and I know we said this earlier on with the committee probably a few times over the couple of years, but we're not in a position, the county's not in a position, or any entity's not in a position to designate someone's private property as open space without compensating them for it, because you deny them use of their property. But to take a piece of property that otherwise could be used for something, whether it's residential or industrial or business park or commercial, and then to say, you know what, we just want your property to be vacant. Well, you can't do that without compensating them for it. So the county's ability, the plan's ability to just designate private property as open space for the next 20, 30 years, it's don't have the position to do that. So to what Craig said, that's not the appropriate move for this location.
And
Having dealt with Meadow Lake over the years, there is no pleasing them. And I mean, if I own that ground and you designate it as open space, the next conversation would be with my attorney.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Doug. Yeah, that's why plans can't do that.
And I'll tell you, I think generally speaking, Doug, the developers who have and are developing around Meadow Lake really try to be a good neighbor. And we're trying to kind of carry some of that forward. And I don't want to harp on this too long, but I guess my point here is we feel like we've done everything we can to make Meadow Lake happy by limiting any potential for crashes into residential within the flight path. And I think by designating something other than residential, I think we've accomplished that.
This is Tom. I want to jump in if I could. I think that what John said and what this conversation is important for us to highlight when we have the public comment time during the Planning Commission, because this addresses not only Meadow Lake's concerns, but seems to me a lot of the concerns that we saw from Black Forest. There are misperceptions out there about what this plan can and cannot do. And so I think a few minutes at the outset just to get everybody on the same page about what we can do or what this plan can do, and the fact that the primary purpose, I believe, or at least really high up there, is protecting existing property rights. And a lot of the things that people were concerned about seem to be trying to take away the rights of other property owners. And so I think we need to put this right up there in front. And John, the way that you described it, I think is a perfect explanation countywide. It doesn't matter what the use is. It doesn't matter who the neighbor is. Ultimately, someone who owns property, and I think there's a misperception too about county-owned land and things like that. There were a lot of assumptions out there that just because there's a big field next to your house that it should stay that way forever. It can if you buy it, but it doesn't have to unless somebody else, if somebody else wants to do something else with it. This will guide us in those decisions, but it will not dictate to property owners what they can and cannot do by itself.
And Tom, I think you hit on a point also that needs to be made up front, just elaborating a little bit on something you said. This is not a regulatory document. This isn't zoning. This doesn't set lot sizes. It creates, in some cases, flexibility for density and lot sizes. But this is not zoning. It's not regulatory. It's an advisory document. There's a lot of comments, and I'm sure Mark will highlight those. At the very next one from the FAA, we identified the master plan is not regulatory, right? So we're not creating regulation through this. This is supposed to be a guiding document for decision making for changes potentially to regulation, but this is not the regulation itself. And I think that's an important thing for the public to hear when we go to hearing. But I think it's also an important thing at the outset of this conversation for everybody to understand. Those of you that haven't dealt with master plans in the past, this is not intended to be regulation.
No, I agree with all that.
On that note, Craig mentioned the FAA and their comments going forward. Just for reference, this was the 200 plus people this included in this were review agencies in the county through the EDARP system. So we allowed everybody in our system to have the opportunity to review the document.
So again, Mark, that was, how many outside agencies did we send it to?
Well, I think Nina said it was like 262.
Every agency we interact with on land use applications, we send a referral to. So that tells you in percentage wise how many we got responses from was pretty low.
For example, the FAA and ultimately various recommendations by the JLS committee, et cetera, recommend adopting certain regulations or recommending utilizing certain regulations. For your reference, we have adopted in zoning regulations standards for Colorado Springs Airport, but we have not fully adopted those for Meadow Lake Airport or any other airports in the county like the Air Force Academy or Bullseye Field or Calhan or Springs East. So that's important to keep in mind that we haven't adopted those regulations for those entities. I think we covered Schriever Air Force Base. There are some changes. They made recommendations, and you'll see through some of the review agencies, the document actually says Air Force in one word, and we need to split that and say Air Force in 2 words, some things like that that are recommended. Next page. I think we skipped one at the very bottom of that, Tricia. 25, I think we jumped over. There you go. Okay, now are there any comments on this page?
Well, I guess on that one, Mark, what's the exhibits file that they sent on 25 from Schriever?
We're going to pull those up, I believe.
Okay.
They gave us a radio dome, a new picture to put in.
Mark, I did not receive those images.
Okay. So we're going to end up.
If it just has to do with that makes sense. There were 2 separate line items that I just wanted to be sure that we didn't miss anything.
It's a prettier picture, Tom.
Good. We like pretty pictures, as long as they're appropriate.
Okay, next page. There was a series of parks comments that were provided. They did those on 2 different levels. And we've tried to address those staff level comments from parks. We received comments from the director of parks at the time, and then later on, after the implementation chapter, they submitted additional comments, and so we had to respond to them. They asked that specifically on page 129 that we include State Land Board Black Forest Section 16 as a part of A, the State Land Board ownership, and B, as part of the parks. And so we need to include that. That's a change that we're going to need to make in this.
Yeah, I thought that was a good catch.
We did not get direct comments from the State Land Board, even though they're a review agency, but for your reference, we met with them, the State Land Board, early in this process. We attended State Land Board meetings. Initially on the project, we and you can see on the existing conditions report, on the existing land use report section, we showed certain actions and called them managed land. Well, the State Land Board has made a lot of changes recently, both good or both aggressive and not aggressive. They're directed to get more money out of the land they own. And if you're familiar with Colorado, the State Land Board generally has section 16 and 36 east of the Front Range, because those areas were in the public domain at the time the State Land Board was created. They own those lands. They generate money for the school system. lately they've been charged with generating more money for the state school system. What that means is there are some lands within that area that the state could ultimately sell as a part of that process, or so ultimately allowed to be developed. So we tried to honor that now. We took those out of managed lands. Originally, people said we should call those open space. Well, the state didn't really like that because that, in their thought, prohibited them from ultimately utilizing their potential for disposal or use of those lands. And so we've recategorized those. Sorry, that was a long-winded approach to that discussion. Next page. You'll see comments from Colorado Interstate Gas that they'd like some recognition as part of the plan. We keyed this. We didn't have certain information on utilities. That was a certain challenge. Utility information, some of it is there, but a lot of details may not be there because of need to protect those facilities. The last comment at the bottom, but we can't see who wrote that. We did receive several comments that our reference to using 30 inches of rainfall per year is inaccurate. Technically, that should be 15 to 22, I think, is the average between the north and the south of the county. So that's a change we'll end up doing.
Mark, earlier in that, I agree with the use of the term exponential when it talks to population growth. There are a couple places in the plan that talks about exponential growth, and that's, you know, technically not correct. But so it may be something to consider to just talk about the, you know, the significant growth, or you can find a different word, but it is not exponential.
Yeah, I would refer to that as significant growth as well.
And just for reference, if you can see Tricia there, she's typing up stuff when we make some changes in an Excel spreadsheet. I think she is, and Nina's keeping track of a few things as well for any of these changes we talk about here. If you see number 40 at the bottom right there, Colorado Springs Airport, we've had some extensive discussions with that, and Mr. Volchoff is on the Airport Advisory Commission. We've tried to change certain maps to acknowledge the accident potential zones for the airport to limit the residential aspects in there. What we found is we didn't get all the maps corrected, so there's a little bit of conflict between the maps. We're going to make some changes, especially on those maps, to make them become more consistent. I think under page 45, they suggested a change with a cross through. One of the challenges we see is on page 46, the compatibility study for Colorado Springs Airport has not been approved yet. The city planning has not made changes to their zoning regulations yet. Those are in the process. So it's a little hard for us to try to say those are effective at present. Page 48, we had some wording in there that created some confusion, and so we'll recommend deletion. some of those comments there are valid, but they relate to the city of Colorado Springs. And I think that applies to page 49 as well.
And for the record, we're more than happy to forward all these comments to the city of Colorado Springs for assistance.
On page 51, we received a request that the Airport Advisory Commission may request for additional time to review the documents. That's what Craig was tying to, is we'll send them to them. On page 52, it was forwarded to the state and CDOT. The challenge is that Ellicott, Springs East, and Calhoun, we do not have any regulatory approach to those. Those are kind of small airports. I think they're pictured on one page, but we don't have any direct relationship to those. Even though they're subject to state regulations, we didn't specifically address them. They'd ask us to do certain things relative to each of those airports that we don't have the regulatory ability to do yet. That could come later, but is not at present. The next one gets a little jumbled because this was submitted by Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, and they did a PDF search and added some things, and Tricia will ultimately pull those up further later in the document. That's a much clearer version to address those comments. But one of the things they said is they recommend replacing military bases with installations. And that may be a word search that we're going to try to have to go through. When we had Air Force, it was one word and it should be two words, some things like that. Next page. And you can see our staff notes on the right-hand side of actions we propose to take. See people making notes, so that's good. We'll wait till everybody looks up and then we'll go to the next page. Okay, next page. You'll see some comments here on page 67 from the Black Forest Trails Association. They're probably, some of those folks may be listening as a part of this. The Black Forest Trails Association was an addendum to the Black Forest preservation plan. It wasn't a separate document. And so some of that is ultimately being rolled into this document to a part in those parts that were related to the county parks and recreation, where they address trails, and some trails are addressed in the transportation section of the plan as well. On page 68, you can see a summary of information from the Northern El Paso County Coalition of Organizations, which is called NEPCO. Primarily, NEPCO deals with the Tri-Lakes area, but does have overlap into what was previously the Black Forest area. The challenge is they summarize their comments here, but they provided those, I think that was Friday after, and in a format that we could not open up and utilize. And even today, I can't open up and utilize the full amount of the document to try to see their comments. So I can't really provide them here other than this summary that's there, because I haven't even read them, haven't been able to read them. Number 4, they say we should reference the Southern Delivery System, but we really are not doing that as any individual project or any individual water projects in the document. We would do reference Colorado Springs in a number of locations.
And Mark, for the record, all these comments about water systems, obviously all of that's covered in detail in the water master plan, which is incorporated by reference here.
I want to remind people of the structure that would ultimately be in the staff report as we go forward. Is the topical elements of the master plan. The things that are being changed are the policy plan and the small area plans. Those are being now rolled into the main document, and this becomes the ultimate main document. And then there are specifically topical elements that are unchanged that are attached to this main document. So we're not changing the water master plan as a part of this. It remains valid and as a part of the overall master plan.
So Craig, how are you guys handling, like, just with NEPCO, again, fair amount of experience dealing with their comments. They tend to be very editorial in nature in any responses. Like item 3, water planning and use should be the #1 priority driving the master plan, not population growth. I mean, there's some of these things that I think, just philosophically, speaking only for myself, that I don't agree with at all. What are you guys doing with some of these comments? And, you know, we're disappointed. We find it incredible that you didn't mention SDS. I mean, that's very common for the lingo, language, and tone and tenor that they tend to provide. As I've said to John before, every comment is appropriate to be made. Not all comments necessarily hold the same credibility. How do we deal with that?
So, I mean, we're not going to dismiss anybody's comments, and I think that's important for everybody here. Some are more on point for the purposes of this plan. You can see the one that's highlighted. You know, the water master plan did come first. It was the priority. That was what I've been championing for the last, I don't know, 5 years, that it was important to do the water master plan first. And that helped kind of guide decision making for where growth can and should go based upon water availability and what that projected demand is likely to be. So, you know, we take those comments, and I don't expect everybody out there to know that we did a water master plan, but I think we can take a comment like that and say, we agree, we did it. You know, water planning did come first. Other comments, you can see we did NA because, you know, things like we were disappointed in learning who comprised this committee. You know, it's not like staff handpicked these people. all of you, that you were all appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. This wasn't, an elected position. It's not a paid position. I actually think that the diversity of the folks on this group is pretty impressive and has been very valuable to this effort. So obviously a comment like that, Doug, that doesn't change the master plan, the draft that we've presented. So what are we supposed to do with that? We acknowledge it. We say no action needed and move on. And I think there's going to be some of those out there. The ones that, actually do propose a significant change, or even a minor change, we want to focus on those, let you all make that decision. But there are some that, again, just aren't appropriate for this type of a document. Again, not being regulatory. When words like "we're disappointed," I mean, okay, I don't know really what to do with that. This committee's been together for 2 years, so some of that probably is not ripe at this point. It's overripe, so to speak. But we got to move forward with the document that we have, and I think this committee needs to be proud of what we put out to the public. You all reviewed this. Obviously, a lot of the internal departments reviewed this. We felt really good about it. I'm not sounding the alarms on this plan at all. Just the opposite. I feel like the comments we got back were either extremely high level or, regulatory in nature in large part. And you're going to see that as Mark walks through these. So we've tried to pull out the ones that we feel like, hey, do you feel like we need to take action on this or not? So, we took some liberties there, and I think we have to in the staff role.
Fair enough. You mean we're not getting paid for this?
I actually asked them to cut the checks, but they won't cut checks for $0. So.
Not even for framing? Come on.
Well, I was going to send Becky a piece of pizza because I haven't bought her pizza in a while, but they won't.
I'll take just a $1 peppercorn rent. That's fine.
I can't mail pizza. I don't know why the post office won't let me do that. But.
Oh, please don't do that. Yeah, I thought their comment about like the committee was just rude.
So, I mean, I'll tell you, some of the experience we've had in the past is they wanted a higher level of standing in the review process of development applications to the extent of a regulatory position. That has not been directed by the Board of County Commissioners, nor is it something that's required under state statute or the Land Development Code. So we continue to send them referrals, both on this as well as on development applications. And, we're grateful for their input. We think that's valuable to have that kind of checks and balances in the community. But if it's not actionable comments, then we just move on. That address your comment, Doug?
Yeah, it does. It's just, I wasn't sure where you were taking. I mean, like I said, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I'm not trying to thwart any of that discussion. It's just how much of it is going to be incorporated into a master plan. I was trying to get a feel for where you guys were coming from, and I think you've answered it. Thank you.
And I continue to try to balance the fact that this committee's been looking at this stuff for quite a while, right? And even talking about this stuff for 2 years. And members of the public have not had that opportunity. So we want to still remain flexible to be able to adapt as needed before we finalize the plan. But I mean, I saw comments that were, we don't want you to do a master plan. Well, I'm not sure that's very constructive. And it's something that's overdue. So I don't really know what to do with that other than say thank you for your comment and move on.
Next page.
We're about at the end of this.
So those were the review agency comments we've received. There's a couple more that we'll highlight that we'll pull up individually. Like we received comments, I think, from the Air Force yesterday. I don't know if those were in Tricia's order. We may end up having to do those at the end just because of how they came in.
Okay. This is the one I have second in my queue.
And I mentioned before the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments comments when I tried to pull them into the spreadsheet, they didn't work very well. So this second one in the queue is how they filled out the form itself. I think we've gone through some of these already. Change bases to installations. Change Air Force to Air Force, 2 words instead of 1 word. If you can scroll down, there you go. Why these have some value in terms of discussion is Ann Werner was developed the JLUS plan, and Craig had some involved in it. And JLUS is Joint Land Use Plan by all the military bases. So we give some credence to those statements and want to be consistent with those plans. Next page. So staff hasn't gone into a great detail of how to address these specifically. If you would go back up, Tricia, 1 page. Bottom left under Chapter 10, Recreation and Tourism. Page 119, the state and federal lands are not depicted accurately. This is one of the things that's interestingly in a process that's now on 2.5 years, the world's changed around us. Yeah. Things have changed. The Air Force apparently, federal acquired certain state lands in the last 2 weeks that's occurred. I've sent this change on now to Tricia to ultimately change it from light green to blue green, or to blue on the map, because this state land board has been now acquired by the federal government. And that's one of the challenges of doing this plan. That's a plan for the entire county. The world has changed. Next page.
That's it for this one. Oh wait, there's one. Yeah, I almost missed one.
So on that point, just for everybody's maybe reference here, it was very interesting. Smack dab in the middle of Schriever Air Force Base was state-owned land. The federal government actually didn't own that land. And that was a transfer that just recently happened, like a donut hole right in the middle of Schriever. So just to Mark's point, having to keep up with that during this process is a little bit challenging. But sort of an interesting little aha moment for everybody with regard to Schriever when that came up.
Can you zoom in on that, on these documents? That's like the super fine print.
Sure.
Thank you. Much better.
Okay, next.
So we're going to move on to next document. Is some of the same stuff.
Yeah, this is the same document now in a Word version that we got this morning. We had trouble converting it to a spreadsheet previously, and so actually you get to see the same thing 3 different times. Because it was kind of jumbled in the spreadsheet, then it was a copy And now it's in a bulleted point.
Okay, all right, so and if this is now the third time, I'm just gonna move on to the next thing. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I'll zoom in a second, but just so you guys could see.
So this came in after the comment period closed, but, and I think you'll zoom in on the second and third paragraphs.
Yeah, yeah.
For reference, we have no zoning overlay for the Air Force Academy's airfield. They're asking us to ultimately develop one for that. That becomes a regulatory tool. You have to, well, the same issue with Meadow Lake is you have to create the regulations and then apply it to the ground. That's what they're asking in this location. I don't want to discount it. That's been in the discussion for a while, and it's in the joint land use plan as well. But I would note that it has very little impact to the county. It has impact to Colorado Springs and the town of Monument, but there's a couple dozen 2.5 acre properties in Springcrest Estates along Highway 83 that are already developed. Therefore, to create a regulation for that has pretty limited impact because those houses are already there.
This is Bolt Chip. So how do you respond to this? I think if I'm hearing this correctly, they're asking for something that they need to initiate.
Well, yeah, how do they initiate? They've requested it. It's been part of the things we have certain documents. I guess the board has to tell us, let's make these changes to our zoning regulations and create new zoning regulations for this and then apply those to the ground. It's a little different than Colorado Springs Airport where we have existing regulations and now they want us to modify those regulations and apply some additional regulations to the ground that weren't there before.
Yeah, and actually having dealt with this many times, and Andrea, I don't know if you were involved in it or not, but I mean, an example would be, if any of you know the farm development that's over north of Interquest or north of Interquest Drive, just west of Voyager, the developer there, which wasn't us, they asked for a crash landing airstrip in the middle of a residential community. It's not really very thoughtful. My opinion is they've gone for a lot of overreach. And I mean, at some level, there's not much you can do with this. I mean, that particular one ended up getting resolved, but the notion of a crash landing strip in the middle of I mean, it's not that large of a community. It really was, it belied common sense.
Yeah, that was probably the most extreme example there, but we do have a lot of, I think we've got past the conflict stage with the Air Force Academy in that we are talking more on a kind of mutual interest resolving issues aspect, but the consistency of the height concerns their expression about the height of buildings in that North Gate Interquest area, which you're starting to get into the county properties in that location. Trying to impose more stringent height limitations than the underlying zoning allows, and fairly recent zoning as well. So that's a challenge. And it's based on a zone that they have that is I can't remember what they call it, but it's like a flight zone where the actual point at which you start measuring that height can be above the ground significantly. It's like a plane rather than the actual ground level. So we have been having some issues there. I'll say that.
Mark Volchev, one of the underlying issues here is we've actually identified that area as a priority annexation area, in hope to have discussions with the city about what annexation, the timeline for annexation would be in that area. And given that they're largely developed properties in the county as residential, this probably is not the biggest priority in terms of looking at compatibility with airports for those two reasons. One, I think it's going to be almost exclusively a city issue eventually when annexation does occur. But the fact that there's no new development in the county part suggests that it probably is not a priority yet. We definitely need to take a look at it and keep it on the radar. But really there's more new development occurring around Colorado Springs Airport, Meadow Lake Airport, which, if we have to spend staff time and resources looking at compatibility and maybe further restricting things through an overlay, those are probably more ripe targets for staff effort. My goal would actually be to see if the city could annex all of this, and then it's really exclusively a city and town and monument issue.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. I guess my curiosity is whoever's going to respond to this, and I hope somebody does, a letter from the Air Base Wing Commander there, what the response is. But that's offline.
Yeah, and I think the response is we understand the concern. It's not being dismissive, but understanding that it's largely developed in the county portion. There's no opportunity to redevelop at a higher density because of the zoning that's in place. But certainly if anything like that does come in, they would be a referral entity on that anyway.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
That zoning that's in place has a 30-foot maximum height restriction on it already.
Got it, thanks.
I don't think there's anything else on this, Mark.
Right. Next.
Moving forward, whatever the next document is.
Next document.
So now we get into a little bit longer discussion. Several planning commissioners have made some comments. Tom Bailey took great comments going forward. And another planning commissioner, Eric Morius, provided comments, and another planning commissioner provided comments as well. So now we're trying to hit a series of Word documents and comments from various people, which also includes comments from the city of Colorado Springs as well. If you receive this document, you can click on the Word document that's there and open up the full document as well.
That opens up to this.
A couple of these changes, Tom, have already been made, and I think you made some comments at the very end as well that included additional page numbers.
Yeah, Mark, that's right. I went back through, saw where a lot of things had been changed. So kind of got an idea of which ones you accepted, which ones you didn't. There were a couple others that were added. I guess for my purposes, the philosophical discussion in that first document that you showed, that was in my email, probably more useful than going through these line by line. I don't recall too much. There's a lot of editorial stuff in here, but I think we touched on this before, the last time we met, that about identifying who specifically should do some of the things that we lay out in the implementation chapter. And I think we need to discuss as a group how we feel about that, because just changing things to just saying the county will, my fear is that if the county will, no one will, because the county's a big thing, a lot of different people. I'd prefer to see Craig Dawsey will, in his spare time, do all of these things, but I know that's probably not reasonable either. So is there a way to be more specific in identifying who can do some of the things that we lay out in the implementation section?
So Tom, in lieu of putting it item by item, we kind of took a different approach. Maybe John, you can cover how we ended up kind of dealing with that. More of a reference back to the text itself, because within the text it does identify who's responsible for that, because you need the context of the text itself to say this is the department that's working on this, and then that implementation is like the next sentence. So instead of adding it to each item, because in some cases it ends up being this like long list of 20 different entities that could have a hand in that. Instead of doing that, we reference it back to the text itself.
Yeah, at some point, it got to be too much for this document to try to go back and provide that level of specific designation for all these different action items. So we referred people back to that section of the plan. At some point, the county as an organization is going to have to determine internally who will have to take point or what different departments may have to work together. But it got to be a pretty extensive hit list, kind of because of the cross-pollination of some of the things and how the county is structured. So we figured the best approach was to reference back to a section of the plan so people could go back and read that piece that referred to that specific action item without trying to assign that level of specificity in the matrix. It just got to be too delineated for this level of plan, given the complexity of the organization and everybody working on multiple things. So we looked into it and abandoned that approach just because of how difficult it is, but not just because it was difficult, because we just didn't feel it was the right way to go about doing it at this point. So that was the approach we took after really looking into it.
That makes some sense, and perhaps what we need to do then is, because I know that this same issue was addressed by at least one other planning commission member before we're going to approve this or certify it. We're probably going to have to explain how this is going to happen. So maybe we plan for a meeting of the people in the county after the plan's approved to step up and say, yeah, I've got this. I understand that I'm on the hook in the text of the plan to do this, and come up with some way, again, periodic evaluations. There's a whole series, obviously, of follow-ons to this, but by identifying who's responsible, then I think we're more likely to get the kind of follow-through that we need, that we expect to see in this. And I'd just like to see it addressed in some way that we can be sure, and again, so we can assure the Planning Commission and ultimately the citizens of the county that there is a mechanism for implementing this plan, and yes, somebody's on the hook to get it done.
So Tom, the timing of this plan is actually great in that context, because the county is getting ready to launch into an update process for our strategic plan. And so that's a county-wide strategic plan that all departments participate in. In some cases, we bring in outside sources as well. This master plan will help shape some of that discussion. That's my intent, is be able to bring the master plan to those group discussions and say, here are the things that we heard through the master plan and that ultimately made it into the text of the master plan. These should be things that we focus on either at a higher level or maybe even in the finer detail in the strategic plan. So this is sort of a stepping stone to that overarching strategic plan for the entire county as well.
And then maybe kind of referencing that as we talk about timelines or putting a reference to that in here in the at the beginning of the implementation section, that this is how it's going to mesh with everything else that's going on in the county. That would go a long way to satisfying the concern that I have about this just sitting on a shelf and gathering dust because nobody's got their personal name on it or their office symbol that somebody's going to come back and make sure, hey, how come you didn't do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation is that this master plan should be a resource that helps guide the creation or the update of the strategic plan, including assigning responsibilities in various departments. So that will be my approach when I engage with the executive director team. That, hey, we have a lot of the stuff already, very fresh. How are we going to make this part of the strategic plan?
And maybe it's right there in, on page 141, next steps. It comes into, someplace in there. It says this plan will be used to do this, to influence the strategic plan.
Agreed.
Yeah, Tom, that's the page I'm looking at right now on my screen. And I think that is the place to put something in here about that with regard to specifically using this to tie back into the strategic plan, the CIP, the county CIP. We can put, some communities have, and I'm not suggesting this unless directed to, but some communities have formed an implementation committee, just a periodic report back on an annual basis, sort of like, we've taken a look at the implementation. Here's what's been done over the last year. Here's what hasn't been done over the next year. Here's what we have on track to do going forward. So some communities will sort of formalize implementation. Other communities just sort of will bequeath that responsibility to the key staff. And we talk in here about regularly updating the plan. Part of that is monitoring what has or has not been implemented. So, but I think we can get to what you're talking about by revising some of the text on page 141 as well. I think that's the best place to do that, as well as tie it back into what Craig said about using it to inform and craft the strategic plan for the county.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but on each of those implementation measures, I thought we'd added the page number that it came from within the plan. Is that correct, Tricia?
Yeah, we did. So it's got the core principle, the goal, the objective, and then for each specific strategy, it has the timing of it and the page number referring back to the page in the plan where it's discussed in detail. That's done for every single one of the strategies. Yeah.
And in most cases, that reference back gives you who that responsible party or parties is likely to be.
Correct.
It just, Tom, we started going through those and the list just got like crazy long on some of them to where it almost made it to where it wasn't even actionable. Like if you have too many people involved, it's never going to get done, right? So there's so many things that can touch different entities, both internal and external, that it sort of had a reverse effect than what you were, I think, intending.
Right.
No, that's perfectly fair. It just, as long as I'm becoming more comfortable addressing it this way, it doesn't have to be finalized before the plan is finalized. As long as we have a way ahead to get there, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think adding in language that it should help inform the strategic plan and other regional planning efforts, I think that's 100% on point, even to the extent of assigning sort of responsibility for implementation, so that they're not all Craig Dossey.
Right.
We'll do mark a couple.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
The other issue I had there, and I don't know if this is a good time to go into the implementation, the checklist. as I keep going back through that, it seems to me that there are places where, because of the complex nature of the questions, you got a couple of different questions. You got a 1 yes and a 1 no, or a no and then a yes, and then what do you do? I chafe a little bit with my planning commissioner hat on that you're just going to give me a checklist and say, here you have to approve this. I know that's an oversimplification, but I don't know if anybody else feels the same way. But like I said, as I read through that, I could see places where question 1, yep, this is important. Question 2, no, it doesn't quite address it that way. And so I'll leave it at that as an open, something to consider. But I just wanted to put that issue out there.
So Tricia, can we zoom in on that text that's up above the checklist on that form?
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Slow down.
There we go. There we go.
And again, this may get, again, this is sort of a recommendation of the plan. The actual form may get revised when it's used. And this is not meant to be sort of like an absolute yes or no, but this is to be used by the plan commissioners and others as a way for them to take notes and to think about stuff. And they might say, is there a desirability or demand for the community, for this use? You might say yes, but you might have a bunch of comments that would sort of frame your thoughts on this. So when you get back to findings of facts or making a determination, and they go around the dyads and each person can sort of say what they think and why, this helps them go through the checklist of, we asked all the right questions, or we asked a lot of the right questions relative to the master plan. There's other things that the plan commission or the board or staff or whatever might bring into consideration that isn't just the master plan. This is just to sort of measure against consistency with the master plan. And it's meant to be sort of like, yeah, I think this does, here's my thoughts, or no, I don't think this does, and here's my thoughts. This is sort of a personal thing for each member to sort of track their thought process on applications, again, relative to the master plan, not other things. That's all.
So Tom, would your concern be if you have any no's, then you should be voting against it? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Well, yeah, my concern would be somebody else reading the plan pulls this out and goes through it and says, this is one of those one-off situations where it doesn't quite match, and it's why we have a planning commission. But you've got citizens up there waving this checklist saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not consistent with your checklist. John caveated it in an important way, I think, at the beginning. If the intent is the idea of a checklist is a good thing, but it may not necessarily be this specific checklist. My fear is that putting this checklist in there plants the seed in somebody's mind that this is how the county is going to make land use decisions in the future. And this is the only way that it's going to happen.
And I would try to frame this as more of a guide than a checklist, because checklist sort of indicates criteria, maybe an evaluation guide. And then adding language in that suggests that, look, even if you have 1 yes, you can still approve it, right? You can have 1 no and still deny it. It's just weighing and balancing the outcomes from kind of going through this mental exercise.
Yeah, and the reason we put in there the mitigating comments was because, first of all, every application has to be considered on the merits of that specific application, not something else. So everything is weighed on its own merit. That being the case, few things are a yes off the bat for everything. Virtually nothing seems to be in the word. The one true thing you can say about development at this point, and Doug can probably back this up, is if it's easy, it's been done. What's left to do takes a little bit of work. It's not easy, low-hanging fruit for development. And the mitigating comments is that, does this proposed use is it whatever the thing is? You might say no, but the mitigating comment might be, but I think with increased landscaping along this edge, it would more than mitigate the fact that this is a no. So the mitigating comments are your thoughts as to what it would take to overcome the no. So it's not like if it's a no, it's I have to deny it. It's as it sits in front of you right now, technically it might not meet this, but the mitigating circumstances, this is located out in the western or the eastern area. It's not close to anything. It's a use we need, but it's a use we didn't anticipate. So the mitigating circumstances, it wasn't a need 5 years ago. There's a need for it now. It's located 5 miles away from anything. So the distance mitigates any negative impact. And I think it's a good use. So the mitigating comments allows you to say why you think it may be a no, but what would mitigate the no to make it a positive component. So
can I interject? Can I interject? Because I think we get where you and Craig are coming from. I shared some of Tom's concerns, and Andrea, I'm curious on yours. Is an applicant supposed to fill this out, and then the planning commission members would respectfully go through and say we agree or disagree? Because there's a couple of things in here that I question if it's even a planning commission's role. Does the market support the need for the use? Would it be viable if built right now? Isn't that my decision as a developer? And I mean, I don't think that I need somebody from planning commission that maybe has never developed anything, that has never built a home, that doesn't know what the trend lines are that are out there, telling me that, well, I would support this, but I'm just not convinced that it's viable if you build it right now. That's my risk. That's my decision to make. And I have to prove to them that I meet these other criteria, which is all, the burden we always bear on every one of our projects. But I question some of this as going a little far afield from what the planning commission members would typically look at. And when you have a checklist like this, I share some of Tom's concerns because, Andrea, I'm curious to, as a consultant, is this something that you feel this is what we should be filling out on every application? Because I will confirm for you, John, you're exactly right. Anything that's low-hanging fruit has been done. Yeah. Everything that is out there right now has some challenges associated with it, and those challenges might be it's incredibly expensive to bring the appropriate infrastructure. It might be that there's mitigating factors associated with it. The other comment, and then I'll stop, is this seems to me to encourage something which, as a developer, as someone who's a reasonably frequent flyer in front of these things, it seems to me that we're encouraging negotiation from the dais. And that is the last thing you want as a developer. I bring my project in, and I always say, people say, well, gee, you seem to get your projects approved. Well, yeah, because we spent 1.5 years planning for it. We did a good job. We addressed all of the staff's comments. It's a thoughtful thing, and we're proud to present it to you. I'm at that point, I don't want each plan, and this, please don't take any offense over this, but we've seen this. I don't want each planning commission member saying, well, if you'd plant 3 more trees here, if you would do this, if you would do that. It took me 1.5 years and $1 million to get in front of them. And now we're saying, you should just make a list of the things you'd like to see in order to approve it. It scares me to death.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, Doug. And I think one of the reasons why I thought this might be a helpful thing to have in here is to actually help the plan commission and, to be honest, help the applicant, the developer. And the reason why I say that is when you get a document that is out there, regardless of how it's intended to be used, people with their own agendas will use it how they see fit. And the intention of the master plan is to ensure sort of a reinforcing of the private sector, a supercharging of development that is desirable and appropriate, to see the aspirations of the county come to fruition over time, and to provide guidance. But what I don't want it to be used for is by a resident to pull out one sentence and use it as a hammer against a developer because that's how they want to use this. So what we're trying to telegraph on the front end for the developer, for the planning commission, for staff, and for residents to say, hey, listen, here's what we're evaluating this by. And I think taking the word checklist off and maybe saying master plan consistency guide or master plan evaluation guide or something like that, just to let people know, hey, this is what we're thinking about when a developer comes forward. Does it reflect the place type where it's proposed? Is the proposed development in a key area? If the answer is no, it's not, well, what might be mitigating that request? So
we already have to write a letter of intent that suggests why does it comply with the master plan? Why is this in compliance with all these criteria? And I get what you're saying, John, but I don't think that's been, I think we have to recognize, and again, no insult to anyone who's ever served on planning commission or board of county commission or anything else. A lot of them have never had any experience in this. But you know what? If you think it's easy to get through Nina and Carrie and John Rice and others, the professional paid staff, to get them to the point where they're making a recommendation of approval or denial, whatever the recommendation is, to planning commission and to board of county commissioner, what we've opened it up now is to a whole bunch of people that get to, after the professionals have gone through, saying, you know what, I'm not sure this is going to work. So, you know, if you change the pitch of your roof, if you do this, if you'd add more landscaping, it's the one thing we asked for is because it takes so much time and so much money to bring a project in front, we don't want to be negotiating incremental conditions at the dais. Rely on your professional staff or don't. And I have a feeling this is a recipe for not just, and I'm not just talking neighbors or people who are anti-development, I'm talking about for everyone in the process. It's like, tell me what your wish list is, and then maybe we can get it approved.
So Doug, I'm going to respectfully disagree. I don't read this to encourage that in any way. This is a 150-page document, right? Not counting mitigation or implementation, excuse me. So it's a 150-page document that we're asking a planning commission member who's maybe been on the job for a month to master and apply to a given proposal. What this is intended to do is to boil it down to portions of the plan that they can reference and utilize as they think through the proposal, right? It's not about trees being planted. It's about, and if you go through it, you'll see, is it in a key area? Does it fit with the recommendations for the key area? You know, I think that's a fair analysis for every planning commission to go through, commission member to go through on rezonings, on sketch plans, on preliminary plans. And maybe we need to fine tune this a little bit more, but this is intended to help shape the thought process of individual planning commission members as they consider it. It's not something to be filled out by the applicant. I agree with you, do the letter of intent. Letter of intent should already be addressing the master plan. So if you're writing a good letter of intent, most of the answers here should be yes.
Agreed. Agreed. But just in the example, Craig, just in the example that John just used, he said, well, some of the mitigating factors, well, maybe it'd be more landscaping. That I'm sorry, you respectfully, you two are not even on the same page. And I guess I just look at it and say, I want to understand the cost benefit. If I bring in a community of 200 units, I generally have somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million invested before I know whether I can move forward. I think we should always ask ourselves, is adding incremental protocol, work, process worth the effort? The developer already writes the letter of intent. Your planning staff beats those things to death, as they should. And I don't know where this adds value other than it potentially makes it longer, more protracted, more expensive, and adds much more potential for debate and dialogue and negotiation. And I'm sorry, I'm the industry representative on here, And I think it's my role to point out where I think there's some real potential for problems.
So just, can we go through specifically where you think the problems lie on that checklist? So the paragraph leading up to it, I want to read what it says. It is a given that not all land use requests will be compatible or supportive of every master plan component. But in the end, to be approved, the land use request should demonstrate that overall it is compatible with and supportive of the master plan, even if not on every checklist item.
Right.
So it's acknowledging that, look, this is an exercise. It's not a criteria list. It's just an exercise to generate that thought process. And I agree with you. Our staff goes through that review, but we're not the decision makers. The decision makers are the planning commission. And there are times the planning commission disagrees with staff, and that's okay. If we've got it wrong, tell us we got it wrong.
Right.
So I don't necessarily want to just pass the buck and say it's all staff, because that would, to me, in my opinion, that minimizes the role of the planning commission and the board of county commissioners. So they could disagree with us. We could have it wrong. So this checklist is intended to allow them to go through a similar process to what staff's going through, and hopefully they end up with the same conclusion that staff ends up with, but that may not be the case. And we don't make recommendations of approval or denial. We make recommendations of consistency on this item, maybe not consistency on this item. And then at the end, the planning commission can take those answers or those recommendations for whatever they want to render a decision.
And I guess, Doug, don't get hung up on my example. It may have been a bad example. I wasn't looking at the list when I gave it. But the bottom line is, we keep saying throughout, one of the most important things the master plan can do is to help guide decision-making with regard to new development. We say that all the time. It's one of the key things. But appointed officials often, they're like, well, what does that mean? How do I use a 150-page document to guide decision? What should I be looking at? What questions should I be asking? And this sort of hits the high marks. Is the development proposed consistent with the place types? Is it in an area designated for growth? Are the uses proposed consistent with, the plan? So, and like Craig said, you don't have to hit all of these. This isn't a checklist. I think maybe checklist is not the right word. Maybe it's guide. I don't know. But it's for the plan commission, how do they use the master plan as a guide to help with their decision-making process?
And actually, Doug, in my opinion, this actually provides more clear expectations, because my staff's going to go through this same process in writing the staff report and evaluating the project. So if we're already doing it and saying this is where we think it meets or doesn't meet, this just brings the planning commission and the board of county commissioners alongside of us so that we're looking at things the same way.
And
this is a Phil. I have to say I do and understand, and I am sympathetic to what Doug is saying. You do have staff in place whose sole purpose is to go through diligently, make sure that everything is in check and balance. And not only that, as an elected official, we have a first and a second reading for any projects that go forward, in which that's when it's our time that we should be well versed in knowing the zoning that the developer is trying to come in to do. And I have to agree with Doug. This, in my opinion, this is time consuming.
So, Phil, just so you know, we don't have two readings on items with the county.
Oh, you don't?
But, no, but I understand your point.
Right. And so at that time, I know for a fact that if planning commission does have some concerns, well, I guess I should speak for the city of Fountain. When we have concerns, staff has concerns, they bring them up, in which the developer has to address those needs, not only to fulfill their obligation for moving forward with a project, but also with the bylaws of the city, zoning rules and whatnot. And so it's not often I agree, but Doug, I have to agree with you. This just adds more layers and could actually be cost hamper to you as a developer, and and tie us up, slowing the process down moving forward.
So I guess I'm not understanding why this adds cost or time. This is something that's done by the Planning Commission when they're considering these items in response to the application that's been made by the developer.
Well,
help me understand that, Phil.
Well, with costs, you're taking away employees' time from moving forward with the next project by tying them up going back to this. And as Doug has stated, when the developer moves forward, they invest hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in the process of trying to put together a project, in which not necessarily just because they take that time and effort, that project will go through. It can be stopped. We've stopped many of projects. There's some that are currently going on that I'm not going to discuss, but it goes back to time as far as staff. I've seen staff butt heads with developers where something should have taken 30 days and it essentially went up to 60 to 90 days, in which that is cost that's being passed on to the city. It's cost that's being passed on to the developer in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but we're already doing this review. This just memorializes the process that we're already doing.
Right.
I guess if I can just
it's not adding a layer necessarily to what we do.
I guess, and I think even Doug mentioned this, the point that the applicant has to determine, consistency with the comprehensive plan or the master plan, and the Plan Commission, as the body charged with reviewing these, has to evaluate the development proposal with consistency of the master plan. That takes place right now, right?
Right.
Okay. So we all agree that takes place right now. No time, no process, whatever. Well, that might be, a Plan Commission member is going to be asked, is this consistent with the master plan? Well, well, let me think about that. These are the questions they would ask to come to that determination or to help work through that. They have to, when they're charged with now, determining if as a Plan Commission member and as a body, they think the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the master plan. This is something they can use to work through that evaluation for themselves. Is it consistent with the place types? Are the uses where they're supposed to be? Is the development in a designated area for development? I mean, these are just things that if they're going to come to the determination without this list, they're going to have to ask those questions anyway. This is providing some consistency of how they can use the master plan to evaluate a development, which the Plan Commission is charged with doing now, but they have no guidance as to how to do that.
Well, that's not fair. That's not fair that they don't have guidance. They have the letter of intent. They have it reviewed by the staff. Andrea, I'd be interested in your opinion if you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, and if I am, then we'll move on. But I do think, for example, there are some questions in here that they're not asked to do, John. And so they're not making, Planning Commission is not making a decision in a vacuum right now. They've got staff's analysis, they've got our analysis. And well, that's kind of what you said. And number two does not belong in this list at all, in my opinion. Maybe there's some more questions, I'm not sure, but Andrea, I'd be real interested in hearing your take on that.
Yeah, I've been listening with interest, and I have similar concerns. I certainly think neither Planning Commission nor staff are qualified to address number two. And yeah, and I assume that this will, a lot of reference has been made to its use by Planning Commission, but I would see staff as using it as well in the initial valuations of when you come in for an EA meeting, and giving their opinions about whether it's consistent with the master plan, and maybe not even getting past first base. So obviously we do have to evaluate the master plan. That's what our letter of intent does. And I'm not sure there's ever a simple yes or no to that. I mean, there's a yes box and a no box, and sometimes it's yes if we do X, or it's just, I know you got the mitigating comments, but I don't know, it's an evaluation that everybody has to go through in the process, but this just seems to focus it on very specific things when there could be a lot of other considerations. Could you scroll down so we can look at some of the other aspects as well? We've just been focusing on
Can I scroll past the top three? I think we've seen.
Yeah, I think we've been looking at those for a while.
Yeah.
The top three, though, we don't look at those as, they're not review criteria when we're making decisions in planning commission. So I kind of fall in the Doug Stemple corner of the, is it really appropriate for the planning commission to decide, is it a good idea? So that's, I think that we may want to consider getting rid of those ones just because we aren't really qualified to do it. We can look and see, you know, compatibility and those kinds of things, but that's kind of a weird consideration, just because I think it's a bad idea doesn't mean it is. There's all kinds of things I thought were bad ideas that turned out to be very successful.
So Becky, I think I agree with you on those three. They're more subjective.
The first three.
Some of the ones like the geographic considerations are very objective because it's all going to be a GIS based mapping exercise. It's just to try to generate that thought process. Hey, this is in a key area. What key area is it in? What does that key area say?
Yeah, that question all makes sense. I think those first three are just so subjective that I don't even know how you could really concretely establish one way or the other.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I agree with that. You know, a lot of these are, Doug, are yes or no answers. If you read the geographic considerations, is the use located within a commercial priority development area?
Craig, I'm not arguing with most of it. But when it started off with, do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's viable? What are the mitigating factors? I've got a project I'm considering right now that some people might think that is absolutely insane, and I think our county, and it has nothing to do with residential development, and yet I think our community is dying for it. And if I bring it in and Carrie goes, Doug, this will never work, that's my risk, not hers.
Well, I think that's a good point. And what I'm hearing, if we took out the baseline considerations, and again, we can wordsmith the other ones, but the geographic ones are very much aligned with just what the plan says. The other one gets at the system's not land use, but talks a lot about the infrastructure needed for development. And throughout the plan, we talk consistently about the importance of the natural environment, because it's the one thing echoed by everybody we spoke with, and the need for conservation design, and is it appropriate or not. But if we took out the first three, the other categories are pretty straightforward. And again, it may be a yes or no, but I've got some thoughts on it. And so if you take out the first three, that may be a bit more, you know, those are probably questions the developer has to do before they even submit an idea is, hey, development team, is there a need for this? Is this a good idea? Is there a market for it? The answer is no, no, no. They're not going to do a proposal or develop.
John, I think what I'd like to do is maybe take a stab at rewording some of these if needed to make it more objective based upon what's in the plan.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. So the whole idea was to drum about using the master plan to guide decision-making, not regulatory, but to guide decision-making. We know we have elected and appointed officials charged with approving stuff. I think, you know, this we thought would help them with some level of consistency in applying this document the county is now about to adopt. And it would allow developers to know, hey, this is what they're going to be looking at, and we know that. And we thought it would just help everybody all the way around, so there'd be fewer surprises at the public hearing process.
Actually, Doug, I looked at this as one of the comments I heard recently from a planning consulting firm was, we don't know what you expect to be in the letter of intent. This should help guide that. This should actually provide that exact framework.
Well, and that comment, I think, is because letters of intent have evolved between, you know, smaller projects, larger projects. We all know that those things vary. Most of them I don't have any problems with, because you're exactly right. The Planning Commission, BOCC, they do have to decide the things that are in the most of those considerations. The best practices, Andrea, I'd be curious on your opinion on that, because, you know, there are alternative practices, and I know that we've gone through this before. you know, John, your firm's predilection is, I think I'm fair in saying, if I'm going to put 200 houses on 100 acres, you'd rather see 200 houses on 50 acres and 50 acres of open space. We do that sometimes when it's right, when it's appropriate, when
it's right, yeah.
when that's what the market wants. There are other times where we have no significant natural features, but we might say we're going to give people backyards because that's what they want. And yet those last 2 points in there all kind of imply that if it's not the former, the latter is bad. And I would tell you there's a market, and we do both. We do 8 units the acre, single family detached with a lot of open space. We also do some stuff that they're on acreage lots because that's what people want, because they have 4 kids and they want their kids playing in their backyard.
Yeah,
I don't.
I agree.
Just so we can move on, how about Mark coordinate with you and Andrea, and we'll grab a couple of our planning commission members who will be engaging with this also, and try to retool this and then bring it back to the group, maybe via email.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think real quickly on the best practices, the objective on my side, unlike maybe some other planners, is not to just academically or theoretically change what development looks like for the sake of changing it. It's simply where environmental conditions might call for a different development approach, not because I don't want 1 acre lots. If that's what people want and it's not encumbering any environmental system or feature, hey, 1 acre lot all you want. I'm just saying in a situation where you might want to be more sensitive, this conservation bond being deployed for those reasons, not for changing the shape of development. So I would agree 100%. Doug.
And Doug, the idea of this was just create better predictability for everybody. This is how we're going to be looking at things. And if we need to tweak it, then we'll tweak it.
Well, we can move on, and thank you for the conversation. And mine wasn't coming from the fact that I thought somebody had bad motivations.
Yeah, no, we get it. Yeah, no biggie.
Hey, Doug, if you accuse me of bad motivations, it wouldn't be the first time.
Or the last time.
That's a good conversation. I mean, that is the root of implementation, right? Is we're going to be dealing with this every day with regard to development applications. We want to make sure we get it right.
Well, we want this to actually work. And if it doesn't, there's no point.
So now we can mute Doug for the rest of the conversation. Is that fair? All right.
Tom, did you have any more discussion on your stuff here?
No, not on this letter. Like I said, those were the 2 biggest things that I wanted to talk about. I appreciate the conversation. I think that Becky and Sarah probably have some opinions on this as well as I do, in terms of I like the idea of including a way that the process is described. My concern is that this checklist distills it down too much, and for not so much for a planning commissioner or for a developer, but for a citizen to open this thing up and say, oh, this is how I get it. This is how I can oppose any development in my backyard. That's misleading to them, and I think ultimately that's the problem that I'm more concerned about addressing. We can have a checklist that we use as we train new planning commissioners. I'm just not sure it's a level of detail that needs to be included in the master plan. Is kind of as over the course of the conversation, I'm kind of leaning more in that direction. But so, great idea.
Tom,
let's take it offline and address it with a smaller group and come back next time.
Tom, I guess my point is if we're able to add more objectivity to it, then it sort of is what it is at that point.
Right.
Rather than making it a subjective exercise.
I do like Tom's point about talking about the public input, where citizens should feel heard. They should kind of have an idea of, you can't pick one little thing and that's what unravels the entire project. And I think that's what Tom's really driving at, so that we have a citizenry that feels that we are representing them, which is what we are doing. and that they're heard and that they have a fair chance. And so I think that's a really nice perspective, and we want to be sensitive to that.
I think it's important to draft that exact thing into the prefacing language, saying it may not check all the boxes, but it could still be a quality proposal.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, good.
And I don't know if Eric is a part of this discussion here, Tricia. I don't know if he's on the list. But Eric had provided some comments to us, and these are my responses to his comments.
Andrea, I would note that we've been on since 10 o'clock without a facilities break. We got about an hour and 15 minutes left. Maybe now would be a good time as we're transitioning to maybe take a 5-minute break for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I was thinking the same thing. I was just going to excuse myself anyway. So we're all excused for 5 minutes. See you soon.
Good.
like started doing that with the first Excel we saw.
It was on sale after they lost in the second round as a top 5 team in the NCAAs.
Yeah. That's okay. All the Rockies gear will be on sale soon too.
I went to opening day, so I saw the one time they'll be above 500 all year.
Yeah, it's rough. You know, I went to look at Avs tickets. Those things are ridiculous. I was going to take my son. I'm like, I'm not paying $300 a ticket to sit in the lower bowl. That's crazy.
No, they are very pricey. And are you and I the only two on?
No, I think it's still being aired.
Gotcha.
I'm listening.
There are people, I'm not one of them, that have tickets and they don't go to all those games. And a lot of times they'll sell them cheap the day of the game. And
Yeah, I was looking at Craigslist and still it's like, I mean, they know what it's worth, you know, but that's right. I probably saved myself the gas and headache of driving through Denver anyway.
yeah. Well, I've gone to 2 Rockies games and I'm probably done for the year. Luckily, our employees love to use them, or I wouldn't have renewed them. The Montforts have no business owning this professional sports team.
Agreed. It sure was a nice agreement they made with St. Louis. They're really there to help St. Louis out a lot.
Yeah, my second favorite team's the Cubs, and so they stick the best third baseman in the game in St. Louis in the same division as the Cubbies. So they hurt both my favorite teams.
Hey Tom, I grew up a Cardinals
Thank
fan.
you.
Tom, I grew up a
Yes.
Cardinals fan. I did. I was an Ozzie Smith fan as a kid.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Ozzie was great.
How can you not be an Ozzie Smith fan? Anybody can do a backwards handspring from the shortstop position, and that was pretty impressive.
You compare Ozzie Smith to Tulowitzki. I'd say the mold for shortstop changed over time.
Starting with Cal Ripken.
All right, are we back on? Everybody ready to roll? Madam Chair? There she
Doug,
is.
if you come to Chicago, we'll go to a Cubs game. How's that sound? We had season tickets for years. We went in with an engineering firm and had 5 seats right behind the bullpen, and we had them for years and years and years. And then after a while, we were just too busy to go, and our staff quit going, and we just sold them back to the engineering firm.
All right, what's next? Mark and Tricia? Mark, are you there?
Yep.
This was the document that we left off on.
These were Tom Bailey's comments. I mean, Eric Morath's comments, and these were our responses. As you can see, some of them are simply technical. We used the wrong chapter name here, 13 instead of 12.
Looks like most of those we agreed with the change. They were more cleanup.
Yeah. We get a little more detailed here now.
Mr. Moraes is our local editor of everything.
He's awesome on that. Yeah.
I think he does that professionally, actually. So the fact that he didn't have more comments made me feel good.
It makes me never want to send him an email. Will he reply and make corrections to my grammar?
Oh.
I don't think he would. He's actually very nice.
Mark, you want to walk through these?
Okay. Trying to respond to other emails while we're talking here. He just thought that we ought to, the first one, page 23, thought we ought to have heavy industrial and utilities. Our choice was not to include it in utilities because everybody would then say in a utility place type, like a wind farm or something like that, it ought to have heavy industrial zoning. We don't agree with that because once you have heavy industrial zoning, you can have all the other uses within that zoning that are inappropriate in rural areas. The second one's probably important to Doug in part and Andrea, and it was relative that we ought to make everybody have, we ought to have a design that says everyone ought to have sidewalks if they're within certain distance of a school. That wouldn't necessarily work. I mean, that creates some challenges when we have different road designs based upon how those roads function, the density of the area. Consistent with the master plan. And then the road design then ends up with a sidewalk design. We don't require sidewalks on anything less than 1 acre in size.
Yeah, the challenge that we've had in those sorts of situations where we're putting a higher density development next to a lower density one, and that, but the roads that were coming off are actually rural classification. And so while we're providing urban level roads with sidewalks within the development, they're connecting to rural roads that have no sidewalks.
And the sidewalks just end.
Yeah.
So we
You
didn't
see that a lot in the Woodmore area generally.
Yeah, and he I think lives in that area of the woods. I think a picture you're going to see is related to the school up in Woodmore. And for reference, Woodmore was developed, I think, before there was any sidewalk criteria for the county in general or a certain road design. So there's not a lot of sidewalks in large areas of Woodmore.
Yeah, and I was saying that we worked very closely with the school district and the developer. I was kind of the intermediary between the developer and the school district on the Safe Routes to School project, and with the developer provided some matching funding for them for the grant that they received to do that, and also gave them easements over their property to basically provide a trail that goes around Lake Woodmore. So there are ways to do that without requiring people to put sidewalks and roads, which aren't intended to have them.
The aviation industry has.
I think he's made a couple recommendations on page 86 for changes in wording.
Who did you say this was from? Remind me.
Tom Reyes, who's the planning commissioner.
Is it Tom? Is that his first name? That is
Eric.
right.
Eric.
We just assume if it's comments, it's got to be from a Tom on planning commission.
In part, Eric was misinterpreting some of my comments here is from taking the master plan to the zoning level. We have a zone district of 2.5 acres that allows for well and septic. And then there's no break. The next zoning break is essentially a 1/2 acre or a 20,000 square foot lot. From what Doug has said before, the market then tells them what size lots the people want in that area. But the road standards, once you go below 2.5 acres, the road standards end up changing. And then you have to have curb and gutter below 1 acre, and you typically would have overlot grading and things like that. Number 2 here should be recognized by Becky, because we had a neighborhood commercial, and through a review committee, the code revision committee, it was recommended to be deleted, and we deleted it out of that process. But like we've said all along, through this, after adoption of this process, there'll be a different effort to potentially update or revise the code to implement certain parts of the master plan.
Anything else on these, Mark? We're going through them.
Nope, we're just scrolling through and nobody's raising any questions. On this last one, he thought that we should number the priorities from highest to lowest, but that's not something we chose to do.
I don't think that value judgment needs to be made. I think if we say they're a priority, then they're a priority. And they're probably different priorities for different people in some ways. So I don't see that as necessary. Because as soon as you do that.
I agree. I think that's challenging because everybody has a different standpoint and different priorities, and the job is of the master plan to try and balance those priorities.
And not to mention budget restrictions in some cases. I mean, you can make it the #1 priority, but if there's no money, then there's no money. Believe it or not, the county does have budgeting challenges, so I know that's shocking to most of you.
On the next one, he thought that priorities might need a time frame. I think something can be a priority to get done. It doesn't mean it has to be done next year versus 5 years from now.
And some of those are ongoing. We say it's a priority, but it's really an ongoing thing.
Well, one of his questions was, is if you're already doing it, how's it a priority since you're already doing it? But
I think that's an easy one. We feel like it's important to keep doing it.
yeah, that's just a twist on words.
Hey, I'm excited my planning commissioners are reading this whole thing. That's pretty great. Makes me happy.
And he really read it.
It's impressive.
It was a good discussion you had on that, where there's red and blue text right there.
Up above?
About the cost evaluation and, whether development pays for itself. There's studies that contradict each other all over the place on that.
Yeah, keep going up, Tricia.
Actually, it's this one, page 50, costs.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right there. Yeah, the study.
Including ongoing cost of the county, and some of that, obviously is probably going to change with the annexation IGA between the city and the county, but maybe not all of it. Those of you that aren't aware of that, you might want to take a look at the agenda item that went to the city council yesterday. IGA between the city of Colorado Springs and El Paso County was effectively adopted yesterday by city council. It had already been approved by Board of County Commissioners, dealing with annexations and development in the county that might ultimately be annexed by the city.
Great.
Pretty big change in how we do things with working with the city.
And that's maybe an important point that we dealt with previously, is the potential areas of annexation, et cetera, that we mapped out and that we're going to probably discuss in a little bit. We worked with, for example, the growth areas that we're projecting matched with the water master plan. That's a great thing how we put that together. Then our growth areas or potential annexation areas generally match with the city of Fountain, city of Monument, and city of Colorado Springs. So people think that we may be doing this in a vacuum and hiding in a hole, but no, we've done pretty well coordination at getting those things together. Next page.
Just confirmation that we do send referrals to Schriever, yes. So these are comments from the city, right, Mark, now?
From Carl Schuler.
Yep.
The first one is that maybe we should now recognize the IGA. Again, that's something that's happened while this process has been going on. His next comment is he thought that and it's the second comment that I've got to follow up on, is whether the county's urban renewal authority has different numbers and is different than the city's urban renewal authority.
I believe the answer to that's yes, but probably want to confirm it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the annexation and how that'll play into Planning Commission's role? Will that already be, say we're approving a development or a subdivision or something that is in the map for the city to ultimately annex? Will it already be annexed by the time we deal with it, or what if they haven't?
If Planning Commission sees it, it will not have been annexed.
So if we're making a decision, but it's ultimately going to be annexed and it's a part of the IGA, how will that inform our decisions?
So it will, you'll evaluate it under our master plan because that's the review criteria. We have the potential, we left that option open within the IGA that if we fall in love with the city's comprehensive annexation plan, there's the potential that staff recommends to the Planning Commission to adopt that as an element of the county's master plan. And if that's
So the staff would ask us up front to do that?
potentially, yeah, depends on what it ends up saying. And if that's the case, then it would also be something that you consider in making your decisions on those development applications.
So will the developer, builder already be informed that that'll be a criteria?
Yeah, if we've adopted it as part of our master plan, then that would be part of how we look at it, and they'd have to address that in their letter of intent as well.
Okay, thank you.
So
We'll see how that all works out. We're not thinking we're going to have a comprehensive annexation plan from the city to review, probably for a few months anyway. So we don't know the answer to that yet.
So as I understand it from reading through it, I've glanced at it, but haven't studied it in detail. If we were going to do a development in the county that is likely eventually to go into the city, would we be developing, I think we would be developing the city street standards, not county, correct?
That would be a request that would have to be made by the city to the county at the EA stage.
Okay, which makes some sense. You really, some of the only variables are in how you guys handle your MS4 and a little bit different street profiles, but most of it are pretty consistent.
Not everybody understands it that way. If you read the articles in the Gazette, it makes it sound like the county doesn't require anything.
Yeah, but those of us who do both know that there's not much difference between the city and the county, other than a little bit of difference in stormwater and a little bit different road profiles. And it's not that your road profiles are necessarily any better or any worse. They just have a little bit different classifications.
Completely agree.
Next page.
Anything you want to highlight on these, Mark?
No, we're scrolling kind of through them fairly quick. I guess there's a couple things. He says we do a good job of things. He likes some of the things we put in our plans.
Are we sure that came from the city?
Yeah.
Come on, John, you know.
Yeah, I was surprised. They were not surprised. It was nice to see from quite a few different agencies or other entities where the comments were overall extremely positive, but then they had a few comments for us to consider. So I know we're focusing here on just the comments people want us to address, but there was a lot of very supportive feedback we got.
Next page. One of the challenges he says is we don't have a lot of definitions in this plan. That may be something we have to try to do in the appendix going forward, or as a supplemental to this plan potentially.
There's always challenges with that in an advisory document when it's not regulatory. I would probably want to get a read from the county attorney's office if they feel comfortable defining something in an advisory document. Because they're the ones that are going to be defending that when we're in court.
On this one right now, Black Forest Section 16 will add, the city's actually bought additional land west of Cheyenne Mountain State Park that I think we should add. Okay, continue.
Some of this was more preference based. Instead of calling the growth area between Falcon and Woodman Road as Falcon, they thought it should be Woodman Road North. To me, that's immaterial.
Including Fire Station 22. That's a new station. I sent Tricia the parcel number for that. That would be a red dot on a map. Number 119 that we're going over right here goes back to Bohart and Chico Ranch, which are both state land board properties. We took them out of managed land and made them a rural designation because we can't call them open space, because in theory, and there's been articles in the newspaper lately about potential changes in ownership of those ranches. Okay, so now, and I think we've already dealt with PPACG on 3 different levels.
Yep.
Now we become the public comments. I have one more agency review, I think, to send. Tricia, you had one marked for agency review, I think, didn't you?
And Mark, we got an email
Possibly.
from Judy about Upper Black Squirrel's comments. I think we blew by those. I would like to go back to those just so the committee can see what those comments were. I think that was in a previous document, maybe.
Yeah, and they hadn't submitted the full comments, and I've now made sure Tricia's just got those.
Okay.
Did you just send them to me?
Just this instant.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Those of you that aren't aware, Upper Black Squirrel has groundwater authority over the Upper Black Squirrel Basin, which is sort of in the Falcon area, somewhat northeast and then southeast of that area. So they essentially have authority over use of that groundwater as an alluvial aquifer.
And can you zoom in, Tricia? Or make it bigger? And scroll down to Chapter 3 land use. The first thing with number 1 was they would like us to say the Black Denver Basin water is not sustainable. That's really related to the water master plan.
And we come right out and say that in the water master plan.
The second part, I guess, is a great advisement, but that's the way we understand it in review development plans. That's kind of a unique scenario, is that it's hard to have under drains because they are in effect mining the water and need to have a water right to utilize them.
That's very regulatory. Is that requires permitting by the state, and it's a design consideration in the county's regulations as well. It's not a master planning issue necessarily.
The page 26, 27 comment about large lot residential place type. Generally, you don't have large lot residential place types on centralized services.
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to come out and say individual wells on a 10-acre lot are discouraged.
That's what we already say on the rural place type. We already say it's generally well and septic.
Yeah, it's just an acknowledgement that that's economically, you're not connecting 20-acre lots to central water and sewer. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I think we have to be realistic on some of this. That would effectively sterilize a lot of those areas.
Yeah.
And if there's a right to receive permitting for those types of things, this document cannot impede upon that right.
Number one is regulatory based upon their rules. Number two is in part addressed in the water master plan.
Mm-hmm. Page 129, the comment there, it's discussed in detail in the water master plan.
Well, in fact, this is a copy over from the water master plan.
About sustainable use of the resources, encouraging reuse, encouraging development of renewable water. So I think maybe they didn't spend the time to take a look at the water master plan when they drafted these comments in large part. Unless there's any recommended changes by the advisory committee as a result of those, I don't see any game changers there.
Greg, what was that comment you mentioned you wanted to go back to?
We just did it.
Oh, we just did it? Oh, okay, well, good.
Check that box.
Yep. Okay.
So going back to Terry Stoka's comments, Mark, I think is where we were at.
I think so.
Those of you that don't know, Terry is involved in the Black Forest Land Use Committee and the Friends of Black Forest.
Okay, would that be, is this what we want to go over?
Yes. Yep. I think the first comment there about an overlay, again, this isn't zoning. Overlay implies a zoning scheme that would not be appropriate in the master plan. They do champion a Black Forest Vision 2020 as a sort of a separate statement. Again, the idea here is to plan for the county as a whole, not for necessarily individual areas. Trying to look at things more cohesively. So, you know, I understand the comment. Certainly understand the level of attachment that residents of Black Forest have to their area. But you know, I don't see a need to incorporate that into the master plan. If we did that, we'd have to offer the same thing for every area of the county, and that would probably take another 5 years to get done.
Okay, you want to pull up that vision, that Word document that's embedded there? Did we do that separately, Tricia?
I have it. It's here. This is their vision.
So folks want to take a little bit of time to scan that. If there's anything that you glean from that you'd like for us to implement in the master plan, we're happy to do that.
Would you zoom into that, please?
Sure. Is that legible? If I'm scrolling too fast, please just let me know. Or too slow, either way.
I'm not, I'm not sure I see anything in there that we haven't captured in some form or another in some of our descriptions in the plan.
Are there
I
specifics
agree,
to
Tim.
talk
I
about?
think we called out the unique aspects of Black Forest that I went out of our way in the plan to do that.
Right.
I think, and,
Yeah.
you know, adequately, certainly adequately, if not more so.
Do you want me to scroll through this entire thing?
Yeah, if you want to just pause right there real quick. Above, they talk about the boundaries of the planning area. There is no Black Forest planning area. Boundaries are based upon those key areas and place types that we identified, which is a comprehensive approach to the entire county. One of the comments that I know that I've heard, and you can see it right here on 4A, density limits. They would like for lots to be limited to no less than 5 acres per lot. I understand that was something that was a principal component of the Black Forest Preservation Plan, or is as it stands today. But that has not always been the case in terms of what was approved in Black Forest. And the concept for any area of the county is to make sure that what goes in there as new development is compatible with what is existing. So if it is an area that's maybe surrounded by 5 acre densities, then we would expect that the new development be similar to that. May not be exactly the same, but it's compatible. So, you know, I think looking at this at a much higher level in terms of compatibility is more appropriate than setting a hard line on densities, because the density hard line did not play out that way even over the course of time as development was approved in Black Forest. This allows for growth to occur in a more responsible way rather than some sort of arbitrary density hard line, and make it more neighborhood specific. So I mean, I understand that, but when you talk about well and septic, you can go down to 2.5 acres. 5 acres is not magical in any way. You know, there are actually some areas in Black Forest like Walden that have central water and sewer. And so to you know, in a scenario where you have new development surrounding that, to have them go 5 acres when Walden could potentially serve that area. Obviously, most of our policies and goals point toward centralized services as the preference. So to sort of arbitrarily make that be 5 acres probably is not appropriate.
On a couple notes, just for edification purposes, parts of Black Forest that are considered Black Forest and in the Black Forest Preservation Plan were zoned in 2 different actions in 1955 and 1965. There are hundreds of lots in Black Forest that were developed prior to those dates that then became zoned for 5 acre lots at the time of those zonings, because that was the only or the highest lot size we had.
And a lot of those are even less than 1 acre.
A lot of them are less than 1 acre, and there's hundreds of them. And so the idea that it's so indelible at 5 acres is challenging. And then even the existing Black Forest plan suggests that the northern parts in the grassland area should stay as 35 acres, even though the zoning is for 5 acres. That's been hugely problematic for the Board of Commissioners as they evaluate subdivision proposals that meet the zoning but are inconsistent with the master plan.
So Tim and Tom, I want to thank you for bringing up the point that we do feel like we've tried to pay special attention to Black Forest and other sensitive areas of the county. But you know, the idea of creating a construct within this plan of some sort of density limitation, that's what zoning does. That's not what master plans do. Master plans help guide decision making moving forward. Zoning is what creates those dimensional limitations or minimums. So I think it's a valid, or it's a point that I appreciate, but it's not appropriate for the master plan in my opinion.
And I would also note that the idea of conservation design and the fact that no lots can be less than 2.5 acres without central water and sewer essentially, to a certain extent, accomplish some of those points anyway.
So, and I should just say, I had a discussion with Mr. Stoka about some of his comments. And one of the concerns that some of the Black Forest folks have is when you have straight zoning and you get 5-acre lots, a lot of those properties end up being turned into sort of de facto contractors' equipment yards. And some of the concerns I heard from some of those residents is that they don't like the visual perception or the aesthetics that come with that very scenario. Compare that to a development that maybe has lots that are 2.5 acres, so that we have cluster design that are governed by covenants that would prohibit things like contractors' equipment yards. You actually get more open space, and you don't have the same negative visual aesthetics associated with it. And I think if you were to ask most Black Forest residents, which would you rather see? I think most would say we like the open space and we don't want to see the contractors' equipment yards. With what we're drafted in the master plan, it actually allows for that to occur, whereas straight zoning would facilitate the opposite.
Yeah, I appreciate all those comments, Craig. I agree, and yeah, I wouldn't go along with putting hard and fast limits in the plan either. So no, I think that's all well and good.
Thanks, Tim. One of the comments I heard was sort of a mistrust of Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners to maybe overuse the ability to say it's compatible by allowing more dense development. That option's already there with regard to straight zoning under the current Black Forest Preservation Plan. It's those decisions get made the way they get made. This plan is not going to keep that subjective ability of the Planning Commission board to say this is compatible from happening. And so I don't feel like this document should in any way regulate the discretion of the Planning Commission or the Board of County Commissioners.
If you would read number 7 here, to a certain extent, number 7 elevates the Black Forest Land Use Committee to a much higher level than what authority they technically have. I don't see how we can go along with something like that. What you're going to see on number 8 relative to roads is a large topic within the public comments that we received that essentially says keep all roads at 60 feet and save all the trees. And our road people kind of have a disagreement with that thought process.
As most you know, we defer to the MTCP as the guide for what roadway widths need to be based upon volume, based upon the need to move regional traffic. This plan is not going to change that. That's a separate planning effort that is going to be renewed once again, upcoming for hopefully an update to be issued in 2022.
Water is of extreme importance to folks in the Black Forest, including planning commissioners and especially the county commissioners.
Mark, can we go, or Tricia, can we go up a little bit? There was a comment up there that caught my attention. Right there, turn lanes. To minimize the impact on private property, turn lanes and acceleration, deceleration lanes should only be utilized at intersections where the volume of traffic is a safety issue. The requirement to add turn lanes comes with volume. It comes with with safety issues that do occur. So I think maybe that comment's a little bit misplaced. I think Doug could probably speak to that. It's not like he's clamoring to add turn lanes anywhere. Those usually, the determination of when those are required is something we evaluate, and it's based upon accident potential and volume. Right above there, number 9, an attempt to restrict eminent domain authority. That's a statutory issue. County doesn't use eminent domain very often. It's not really our way of doing business necessarily. But certainly this document's not going to change state statute. I've tried. The state doesn't listen to me very often, so I'll keep working at it, but not on this issue.
And on the water, one of the big topics was, when Cherokee put some shallow wells up there that were going to be used for pumping shallow aquifer wells out. Turned out that the wells weren't viable anyway. I mean, you can drill them. Most of the 5-acre lots, 2.5-acre lots up there, they get 30 to 40 gallons a minute. That's all Cherokee was getting from theirs, shallow one, and they're not using it. So, and City of Colorado Springs already has a lot of regulations about using aquifers. So I think a lot of this doesn't make much sense. I shouldn't say it doesn't make much sense. I think a lot of this is already redundant with things that are in place. And like on a central water system, we're encouraged to install central water supply, but there's no density bonus. Well, you're never going to get a developer to put in a central water supply if you don't give them a density bonus, because it already costs a fairly outrageous amount of money to develop. When you put in water and sewer and that kind of stuff, I mean, if you're limited to traversing it past 2.5 and 5-acre lots, not going to happen very often. Walden's is an exception, but that's tough.
The point about encouraging central water systems to go into the deep aquifers, the water master plan already does that on high capacity wells.
Yep.
Any other comments on these, on the document from Mr. Stoka or anybody?
Didn't we talk about wildfire prevention or mitigation somewhere in the plan? I seem to remember
There's
at least a sentence or two, I thought.
Yeah, there's in the resiliency chapter.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the resiliency chapter brought forth stuff from the our county office of emergency planning, or city county office of emergency planning, and brought it directly into this. Okay, continue.
That's the end of the document.
Okay.
So the comment there at the end, existing residents have a right to be considered in land use decisions. As you all know, those are all public hearings. We send notices out on those as well. Okay, what's next, Mark?
We're going to go back to a series of comments from Judy.
Okay. Do you want me to scroll through this, or do you want me to just open the documents I have?
Well, I think you scroll through this and then you would open the document.
Okay.
Right now in red is many comments received on development west of 83 should be amended to be a priority development area. That's something that we agree with, and that will be, there's a couple things in these comments, and we'll get to them also on the public comments. Is there was many people said that Loft Array property should not be listed as a priority for development. We've agreed to change that, delete that priority for development. We also would expand this to include the areas west of 83 that are unplatted properties to be a priority for development as well.
Do you want me to open this Excel?
Well, I think we should look at our time, and I don't mean to short Judy of time, but if we do that, then we're going to have a real hard time of opening up the public comments that we previously had done. I don't know how the committee is able to, whether they're able to stay any longer or what commitments they have. I guess it's the committee's choice of where we go next.
Andrea is the chair. How would you like to proceed, given that where we're at right now?
Yeah, I think we ought to get onto the other public comments. I certainly can't stay beyond 1. I've got a meeting at 1:30, and somewhere in between there, plan to get some lunch. So I think 1 o'clock is when we need to wrap up.
And I can tell you, I have a hard stop at 1 too. I actually have an interview with the Gazette about the master plan, ironically. So.
Well, I've read it at least. I've read through all these and didn't see anything that was, that really jumped out as a need for conversation. I don't know about anybody else, but I'd rather move on to some of the other ones where there are some things that I think we need to discuss today.
And as you circle back around on these and maybe review these in more detail, if there is something that comes up on Judy's comments, please let us know, and we'd like to address those.
Okay, so this sheet here,
I agree with Tom. I didn't see anything unique in here.
This sheet here is, I took all 345 plus comments on the spreadsheet that had public comments on them. And I think you've seen some information here, or we'll get to some information on how people were instructed to add certain comments to those sections. And so we have a whole lot of repeat comments of the same thing. What I tried here was to pull out those that were unique and were not repetitive comments going forward. And so I think we've highlighted each of those by what section they were in.
Is this the general public comments, or are we still on Judy's here, Mark?
Well, this is the general public comments.
Okay.
I'm gonna scroll and you guys tell me when to stop.
Page 163 came from Schriever, so we partially addressed that already. So what this tends to do, or what this does, is essentially I deleted things that were mostly duplicate and left them fairly but many of these comments are general statements rather than change this section to read something else. Some interesting things like I didn't bother to read this because you don't do what we say anyway. Keep going. The highlighted section here, I think we were going to make a change to make reference to the hailstorms because they've been a very significant natural hazard that's occurred in here.
Mark, would that be in the resiliency chapter?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, the combination of the hailstorms exceeds the damage claims from all the fires, or from each of the fires. These numbers are actually in the opposite order of where they came in from the, for where people filled out the comment sheet. That was easier for me to sort through them. If you can think there's 345 comments with 14 columns each, I'm not sure you want to see that whole spreadsheet. But Tricia is going to show us a neat thing with that spreadsheet after we get through with this.
Does Tricia know that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're gonna have
Check.
to remind me, what am I showing?
You're showing the 1, 2, 3 sheet.
Okay.
So what I get from this is some of these are just sort of comments. They're not really requested changes or actions. I saw one that said that the food availability section concerns me too. I'm not sure what to do with that, but.
Well, in that section.
Can you pause? I want to read about the woke garbage. Sorry.
Did I scroll past something?
I'll just pause there. Good. It's at the
Okay.
bottom of that.
Andrea, isn't that rubbish?
Rubbish, yes. Rubbish in the UK. I was just trying to work out, okay, what they're getting at, okay. Continue.
I mean, I don't know what to do with that comment. I didn't bother reading it because what did it say? Tricia, go back up.
This one?
I didn't bother reading it because the county and its commissioners never followed any of the previous master plans. Okay.
Because clearly that says I didn't read the document, but I can cut and paste into the various sections of this survey.
I mean, I'm sorry they feel that way, but we were tasked by the Board of County Commissioners to do this project, and we're given a budget to do so.
And anyone who thinks that the county doesn't follow their master plan has never processed anything in the county.
Yeah, it's part of that big misperception that, there's some conspiracy out here to just do whatever we want and bring people in. And it's part of what I talked about at the very beginning. I think we need to be sure, especially for people that are interested enough to come to the public comment sessions, to try to do some education about what the process is and the fact that, yes, the county spent quite a bit of money to do this. It wasn't paid for by a bunch of developers. It was done, to be sure that the citizens of the county had a voice and have a voice in this process. And yeah, we're all here to attest to the fact that we've spent a lot of time listening to those voices, whether they agree with it or not, whether they understand what we've done or not. It has been done, so probably an uphill climb, but it's at least something we should mention.
Well, and Tom, one of the things we always talk about is the validity of a plan that's 32 years old. Challenges of that. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is to provide it in a much more updated context. Yeah, there's been changes over the course of time. That happens. One of the reasons why we did this is to update those goals and policies so that we're looking at it with a renewed approach.
So, sorry, just to clarify, Mark, I think you said this earlier, but people are literally just cutting and pasting the same comments under each of these questions.
Yes.
Because I'm seeing a lot of repeats, so that's.
I think there was
You see repeats in
whatever.
each
How many were there
question.
total? 74 from the same that said the same thing.
Yeah, something like that. I repeated them because they cut and paste into each section, but there might be 50 or 74 in that section that say exactly the same thing that I deleted.
It looks like the never followed comment is in 14 places. So
Yeah.
that's just like such a harsh, like, how do you even respond to that? It's like, never? It's like, it's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah.
And give our military credit, we just went through some that they'd responded. They also did it in EDARP. They did it to make sure we understood what their thoughts were.
And I think that's something to be said. I mean, this process has engaged the military so much more extensively than any of the existing plans ever did. And I'll tell you, I'm very proud of that. I think this has been a great partnership stemming from the JLIS plan into this plan. You know, it's a big industry in this county, and to not coordinate with them to make sure that we're a good partner with them, that would have bothered me a great deal. And I'm very proud of the effort that we've had with the military installations up to this point. So again, of course, question about water. Water is addressed in the water master plan.
Why is flying a horse a potential for annexation? Well, that reflects what the city's annexation plan suggests.
Yeah, I think it needs to be said that even if we didn't show it, that wouldn't necessarily keep the city from annexing anything.
Well,
they have authority to do that under state statute.
And that is a misconception. They believe that the county can stop annexation of property. The county doesn't really have any choice in that discussion.
It would have been a disingenuous approach to deliberately leave things off that the city's already shown in their annexation plan. I think that we would have been out of turn to do that. We got about 8 minutes left here. It looks like these comments are all the same.
Yeah, scroll faster and see if you see highlighted ones.
And I guess I should ask questions. Does anybody feel the need to do a second one of these meetings to go through comments in greater detail?
I would suggest, as long as if Mark can send us the comments as he's done, and I liked the analysis, the PDF that had everything in there. That word cloud was pretty interesting to see. Pretty obvious that a lot of people were interested in Black Forest. But I think that I would actually probably prefer to read it myself, shoot back some notes to Mark, and identify maybe, a handful of things that we feel the need to come back on. Reviewing each of these individual ones, it's an important part of the process, but I don't know that we need to devote this much time to this same kind of effort. If we can highlight just a couple of things that, each of us as a group feel we need to talk about. I would rather do that than schedule another one of these just without a specific agenda.
You have this same document. I guess you could tell me what is important by email or something like that to have a combined document.
Well, and whatever change we do make as a result of those, we'll send out to the group as a whole.
Right.
So I guess it's probably a good time to note that the first, if everybody's comfortable with kind of how we're addressing comments, we are tentatively scheduled to have the Planning Commission have the first hearing on this on May 5th. Does anybody in this group feel like we're not at a point where we can do that?
Not really. I think that'll work.
And it's important to note that planning commission may have comments that need to result in revisions. That's why there's a second hearing, right? So the game plan going into planning commission is to have staff presentation the morning of the 5th, start public comment the afternoon of the 5th at the planning commission, and then kind of go from there. And then the second hearing is scheduled for the 26th of May. At that point, we would present any revisions that were made as a result of that first hearing, and take any additional public testimony that we didn't take with the first hearing.
And those hearings would be operated by the county. So they would be just like the planning commission hearing, and we'll send out a notice on the webpage and a notice and do legal notice, and our PIO will notice on how to interact with the planning commission, how to call in, how to send us an email that says you want to participate and give your phone number, and then we will call you, and then you will speak. We'll probably have to alternate maybe between people that are present. We're going to only have a limited presence at the hearing. There will be some ability to have presence, but
yes and no, Mark. I mean, what we heard from the county attorney's office, they felt comfortable having up to 50 or 60 people in Centennial Hall at the hearing room. So it's not that limited.
well, there'd be a number of staff, and that includes staff and whatever. Yeah. And if we get too many people, people have to wait outside.
So we are meeting with Tom and with our chair of the planning commission, Brian Risley, to talk about format for that, and that'll be presented at the planning commission as well. We're actually meeting this afternoon, I believe.
Tom's getting a full day of Craig. Woo!
Yeah.
I want extra credit for having to meet Craig twice in one day.
You should have seen how short that straw was that he drew. Whew. All right. So at this point, Andrea, if you feel comfortable just having folks send us anything that they want us to specifically address through these comments, we're happy to do that. I know Mark's gone through all these. And then whatever we change, Mark can keep a kind of a running list and show the group that. But if everybody's comfortable with that approach and then moving it toward planning commission for the 5th, that's what I would like to do.
Okay. Yeah, I think if we just send them out and people provide comments, that's fine. But we made good progress here today and had some good discussion.
So just at a higher level, not that I need a formal recommendation from this body, but if everybody's agreeable to moving forward to hand this off to the planning commission, essentially identifying that your work here is done.
Yay. Well, some of them.
Some are just starting, right? So just a general head nod, not a formal action, but if everybody's comfortable with that, that's the approach I would like to take.
Yeah, I think I'm good with that.
I'm fine.
And
Mark,
if we can get maybe Doug and Andrea to work with Mark and a couple of our planning commission members on that checklist, we can send that out to the group too, so everybody can see that before we finalize it for planning commission. If you're all willing to help us with that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to jump over to a call, but before I leave, I do want to say thank you to everybody that was on the advisory committee. I cannot tell you how valuable this process was. I think for this project, but probably for staff as well. You know, a lot of times what we talk about in a document, over the course of time, we lose sight of what the intent was. And being able to hear comments from all of you about what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think will help inform a lot of what staff does and how we interact with this plan and hopefully implement it moving forward. So thank you all for your participation. You all did a lot of work. It's definitely a huge lift. I think it's something to be proud of, and hopefully it's something we can champion for the next 10 plus years.
Well, we work with a lot of committees all across the US, and the input you guys put into this is make this document much, much better than it otherwise would have been. So appreciate all the effort.
Good. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it is. And I appreciated the way the dialogue went. It was a lot of times people coming at it from a different perspective, but it was never, it was sometimes disagreement, but never disagreeable. That's
Right.
That's refreshing in today's world.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think with that, then we can call the meeting to an end, adjourn, and the committee to an adjournment. And I think I would just like to commend everybody for their continued involvement and also working through, having to do everything online through COVID restrictions. I think considering the constraints we've had, it's been a great process and everybody's really participated consistently throughout, and it's been enjoyable to work with everybody. So with that, we can all sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
And good luck for those on planning commission.
All right, see you guys soon.
Soon.
Yeah.